Hi. In this unit, we're going to look at another specialty area of management that applies to almost all organizations. And that's something that's called human resource management. And this looks at the specific approaches we use to manage people in the organization. Now, we've been talking throughout this entire course about how to manage people. Human resource management, though, specifically deals with the policies and the broader approaches that an organization uses to manage everyone, not specific cases with specific people. Human resource management used to be called personnel, and you'll still hear it called that in older organizations. It means exactly the same thing. It tends to be not management by individual leadership and action, but management by policy, telling the organization consistent rules about how people must be treated. So HR management manages people throughout their entire organizational life. It manages how those people are recruited and hired, how we train and develop them, how we select them for promotion, how we motivate them and get them to work for us, and finally how we let them go, how they leave the organization. All of this should happen according to an organization's plans. We looked at planning at the beginning of this course, and we talked about the idea of first lay plans, then design your organization to meet those plans, and establish control and leadership approaches that help you execute those plans. Human resource management is done the same way. You should develop your human resource policies to help your organization execute its plans. Now, organizations are often very complex, and they're filled with human beings. And human beings are the most complex thing we've ever encountered in the universe. We don't always understand ourselves very well. We're all different. We communicate differently. We want different things. We have different skills and different motivations. Human resource management has to try and make sense out of all of this and to give individual managers inside an organization assistance and guidance in how to deal with people. So let's start off with recruiting. How do we get people into an organization? You'll hear this referred to as the war for talent. All organizations seek talented people, people with skills, but also people with strong leadership capabilities, with high levels of motivation. We're all looking for those perfect employees to do the work of the organization. Since we're competing for those, we're at war with other organizations, with other choices the best employees have. So how do we do that? The first thing the organization needs to do, its human resource managers need to do, is identify the kinds of skills and talents that we need. If we have good plans that describe how we'll go forward into the future and what we're going to do, then we can ask ourselves, what kinds of people will we need to help us do those things? That tells HR where to start. Then we have to ask, how will we attract those people with those skills and those talents to come to work for us as opposed to our competition? Then, when we have people who are interested in working for us, we have to decide, how do I assess their skills? How do I know who is right and who is not? And then I need to develop processes that let all my managers who have hiring responsibility throughout the organization to do this systematically and consistently. So I need to boil all of this down into simple operational processes that then have good control mechanisms to make sure I'm staying on track. Now, recruitment typically involves advertising for applicants. I can run classic advertisements. There are now 100 websites that will help me do this. But the idea is I tell a broad group of people what I'm looking for, and I invite them to apply, invite them to attempt to join my organization. I then have to sort out those who respond. I need ways to tell who are the best employees for a given situation. And we'll look at some of those tools and approaches. Typically, I use interviews and some tests to select people based on their skills and on their previous experience, what they know how to do, what they've done in the past. One of the most common approaches and one of the most effective is something called a situational interview. This is an interview where someone from the company talks to a candidate and asks them about situations. Typically, these lead to questions like, Tell me about the time you solved a major problem. Tell me about the time you dealt with a conflict between two angry employees. Tell me about the time you were faced with a difficult decision about who to let go. The candidate, in answering these questions, gives the interviewer a picture of themselves, not of their opinions and not necessarily of their skills, but of their background and experience. What have they done before, and what have they learned from those previous experiences? So situational interviews, very, very common. They've been around for a long time. We still use them because they work really well. We can do some other things as well. Work sampling. This is when I ask a candidate to actually do the job, to do a task that will be part of their job. If I'm trying to hire a bookkeeper and their job is to make entries into the general ledger, I might give them a draft general ledger and a set of accounting actions and ask them to put those into my general ledger. I watch them do the job I'm going to pay them to do. This is common in very, very simple jobs. You see it a lot in low-level assembly line manufacturing and in clerical positions. It's nice because it shows you exactly what to expect with that employee and how they're likely to do the work, but it doesn't tell you much more than that. Aptitude testing is a little bit broader take on work sampling. This happens in situations where I may not be able to ask the employee to demonstrate the task for the job I'm hiring, but I ask them to perform a task that uses the same sorts of skills or talents. So I might ask the person, instead of doing the general ledger, I might give them something that's related to that and assume that if they can do this related thing, then they can probably do well at the specific tasks. If, for example, I'm going to ask them to assemble complex parts, it might not be possible to have them actually assemble one of those parts in front of me. I might give them a simpler part, a puzzle of some kind, and ask them to put that together in front of me. What they're doing is telling me that they're good at assembly. They understand spatial relationships and can put parts together quickly and effectively, even if they're not exactly the parts that I'll have them working on in my own plant. So work sampling, very specific. Aptitude testing, a little more general. But the idea is I'm asking them to demonstrate something for me. Once I've brought these people on board, then I need to think about how I'm going to develop and train them. This is an investment in something called human capital. And today you'll begin to hear people, instead of talking about human resource management, HRM, you'll hear them talk about HCM, human capital management. It means exactly the same thing as HR management. It's just the next fashionable buzzword. But the idea is that I make investments into my employees to make them more effective employees, to give them greater skills, to develop their talents, to give them new skills so that I can promote them into new jobs and give them more responsibility. The first thing I need to do, though, is to bring them into the organization. Our organization has very specific operations, very specific culture, and they need to be trained in all of this and brought onto the team. The buzzword for today for that is called onboarding. The idea that it is a specific HRM process to bring an employee on board within an organization. And that's a typical function of a human resource management process. As I begin to develop my employees, I have to trade off investments in skills so I get more skilled, more effective employees, but there are costs associated with that. The costs of the training, the time taken away from the employee's work. So HR management organizations tend to balance those two things, and they make careful decisions about who to train, when, at what cost. Once I've trained people and I have a group of people with different levels of skills, different levels of training progressing through the organization, I need to track all of that. I need to give myself and other managers feedback in a control loop that shows them the skills and abilities that are available to them within the organization. Now that I've got these people trained and ready to work, I need to motivate them. And this means designing jobs that encourage people to work hard, that provide inherent, intrinsic motivations. We've talked about this in a previous module, how the benefits and effect of job design is part of broad motivation. Typically, the people who are most involved in this are human resource managers. The idea is to get the most out of my people, to give them the strongest incentives. I need to develop very competitive compensation plans, but affordable plans. It's easy to attract really good people by offering them very large amounts of money, but sometimes that's unaffordable, and it means that my products would be priced out of the market. So human resource managers spend a lot of time balancing the need to attract and retain and motivate employees with the need to keep my costs under control. And that expresses itself in a good compensation plan. Often I look for bonus structures, I look for other incentives that will specifically motivate employees and managers to work as hard as they can for the organization. And this goes back to all of the studies we've had in motivation in this course. Finally, employees leave an organization for many reasons. They can be fired, they can be laid off for economic reasons, they can choose to quit, they can retire, unfortunately they can die or be injured and forced to step down. Human resource managers deal with that at every step. We generally refer to offboarding, which is just the opposite of onboarding. Onboarding was how to bring people on board in the organization, and offboarding is how you separate them from the organization. Complex process. When we talk about this, it's not as easy as pointing at someone and saying, you're fired. We have to ask ourselves about the long-term implications. How will other employees react to that? Does that employee have the opportunity to harm us in the future? Do they have company secrets? Do we have a contract that associates with us that could expose us to legal implications? If we're going to lay off employees, how will the employees we retain feel about that? What will happen to the work that those employees were doing? So human resource management spends a lot of time bringing people on, but they often spend as much time bringing people off as well. Now, something about this, in the United States, the most significant employment relationship between employees and an employer, an organization, is something called employment at will. And that simply means that both employee and employer can cancel the arrangement at any time. You can quit your job any day of the week. There is a cultural expectation that you'll give your employer 2 weeks' notice, but that's not a legal requirement of any kind. You can simply decide not to go to work today, and there are no legal implications for that unless you have a specific contract that might address that. Likewise, an employer can simply decide to fire you. Now, there are some rules about when and how that can happen, the basis of that choice, but employment at will means that both employee and employer have to agree at all times that that employee works for that employer, and either of you can quit at any time. And that has significant implications for both sides in terms of their employment, and HR managers need to be aware of that. Diversity is an issue that comes up a lot. It's a word that has a lot of different meanings for a lot of different people. But the idea is that we are, in the United States, in modern times, bringing more and more different people into organizations than we've ever seen before. This gives organizations huge opportunities in terms of gaining broader perspective, new and fresh ideas, broader sets of skills. However, it also gives them challenges in terms of integrating all of these very different people, providing adequate motivation, providing good treatment, making sure that they do what they can. This is kind of a picture of a situation. Women in the United States have been entering the ranks of management at steadily increasing rates. And in many organizations, you'll find as many female as male managers. Organizations can be managed by women at the highest level. But sometimes organizations will have a situation where culturally they find it very difficult to accept female leadership above a certain level in the organization. And we refer to this as a glass ceiling. A glass ceiling, this young woman is a manager in this organization, and she can see what's happening above her, but she can't get to it because there's a layer of glass between her. Above her is a layer of glass. In the organization, there may be no female vice presidents. And so these are the kinds of issues that can demotivate women, that can keep this group of highly intelligent, highly productive employees from being happy, from joining the organization or for staying in the organization after they've joined. And as a result, these are the kinds of things that HR managers have to address in terms of setting policies, but also in terms of developing control systems, making sure, collecting feedback to make sure that the policies are adequately addressed, that those policies are being followed, and that the policies are producing the results that we seek. In most organizations, human resource managers are staff functions, which you remember when we first looked at line and staff organizations, they tend to be off to the side somewhere, not on the main line of authority. And this positions them to provide policy guidance for the entire organization. HR managers are not the people who make individual decisions about hiring, about firing, about training. They're the people who tell all other managers in the organization how to do those things. So it's an important but highly specialized area of management. Every organization has some aspect of human resource management, whether it's a formal position or whether it's simply an informal approach. If you have people, more than one person in your organization, then you need some HR management policies. That's HR management. I would encourage you to read the material associated with this unit and to review the questions and attempt to answer them yourself. If you're at all concerned or confused about human resource management, I would encourage you to watch this video as often as you need to.